Welcome back, MVP. Streebo here from Mutantville.com. It's time for another edition of MMA Mutants with MVP. First of all, Fedor Emelianenko, respect. That's right. One has to respect a guy that has resided at the top of the pound-for-pound MMA rankings for, the better part of the last decade. In case you've been living under a rock or out in the desert, not paying attention to the world of mixed martial arts, this past weekend saw Fedor Emelianenko take his first official loss. He did have a loss on his record, but it was kind of dodgy from a series of weird circumstances in a Japanese organization. But anyway, it wasn't a real loss. This past weekend, he was submitted in a masterful jiu-jitsu triangle armbar combination by Fabricio Werdum, and he had to tap, and it happened, I think, in less than a minute, and it was a real loss. But I'm a Fedor fan. One more thing. I'm not going to allow any kind of nonsensical comments on this video. Okay, we're going to talk some sense about Fedor. So if you have anything stupid to say, go find a forum and spew your nonsense there. It's not going to happen here. Don't waste your time because nobody will ever see your comments. Now let's move on. But I think a lot of people could really feel this loss coming. In the forums, in the month leading up to the fight, people kept saying, if Fedor loses, I'm never going to watch MMA again, or if Fedor loses, it's because he's old, or if Fedor loses, everybody will say he's washed up. And I think the reason they were doing that is because, with all honesty, it's really been since he fought Mirko Cro Cop in August of 2005 in Pride that he's fought a real top 5 MMA fighter. And even Werdum is not a top 5 fighter. I would probably put him in at top 10 prior to this fight. Now he deserves a top 10 ranking, possibly top 5. I mean, I'd put him maybe at 2 or 3 or 4, maybe 5, depending on how one ranks all the UFC guys. So, although Fedor had been winning, he'd been fighting a lot of guys that really weren't on his talent level, that really weren't pushing him. Ever since the Cro Cop battle, he's really kind of had an easy path. I mean, people that are uninformed like to make a big deal out of his victories over former UFC champions Tim Sylvia and Andrei Arlovsky. And in all honesty, anybody that followed MMA at the time those guys were champions knows that the best heavyweights were fighting in Pride. They weren't in the UFC, and the only heavyweights in the UFC at the time were really Tim Sylvia and Andrei Arlovsky, and they were just kind of holding the belt hostage, trading it back and forth, and not really fighting any of the other top heavyweights in the UFC. Mir was set to clear it out. He would have choked out Arlovsky if they ever fought. But after he broke Tim Sylvia's arm, he had that accident and had to relinquish the title and blah, blah, blah. Before I digress, let's stay on track with Fedor. Fedor is a bad dude, okay? I've always considered Fedor pound for pound number 1 because of his victories over a prime Antonio Rodrigo Nogueira Minotauro and a prime Mirko Cro Cop, because before Fedor came along, Nogueira was choking everybody. He was putting people into slumberland like Little Nemo. I mean, like nobody's business. He was sending out gas bombs everywhere, putting them to sleep. Fedor came in and steamrolled Nogueira. In 2 different fights. They had 3 fights, but the second one was cut short. So we don't really count that one. But in the first and the third fight, he just steamrolled Nogueira. It was awful. And before that, nobody could hang with Nogueira. I mean, Nogueira, he was tossing people around everywhere with his guard techniques, his mount techniques. If he attained full mount on you, it was over. If even guys in his guard, if he caught you in his guard, he was going to put you to sleep. And then Mirko came in from K1 and was basically kicking guys in the head and knocking them out. So you had this clear pyramid of heavyweights, okay, where all these heavyweights had been choked out by Nogueira, all these heavyweights had been choked out by Krokop, a pile of bodies leading up to those two. The top, Fedor beat them both. That's why Fedor was the best. Now we have a recent crop of UFC heavyweights, currently led by Brock Lesnar. There's some tough guys in the UFC division right now. Shane Carwin, Junior Dos Santos, Cain Velasquez. Those are some bad dudes. And Fedor was running the risk of becoming obsolete because he's not fighting those guys. Those are the new young up-and-comers. Now, here's a new young up-and-comer wants to say hello, apparently. They're the new young up-and-comers that are representing the best of the heavyweights now, much like where Pride was the best of the heavyweights from 2000 to 2005. Now the UFC has the best heavyweights ever since, they bought out Pride pretty much. It's from 2007 to 2010. And Fedor wasn't fighting the best anymore. He'd been fighting too many cans, I'm sorry if you're an Arlovsky fan, but I was never sold on the guy. His best victory was his victory over Sylvia, and I suppose if you want, he did have a legitimate victory over Werdum in a rather dreadful fight, but Sylvia was a bum. I hate that guy. I hate him because you could take a statue, okay, put it in the ring, and put a UFC fighter in there, and the fighter would not be able to knock the statue down, not be able to pull it over, and at the end of the fight, the judges would say the statue wins, though it did nothing. That's the equivalent of a Tim Sylvia fight. The guy did nothing. He just won by virtue of being big. It's like if I went and just fought kindergartners my whole life. I could be heavyweight champion of the world just because I was bigger than them. I hate Sylvia. He's a bum. Seeing him get knocked out by Mercer was the greatest thing I've ever seen. But anyway, I'm still digressing. Fedor deserves respect. The dude is bad. Werdum deserves respect. He deserves a top ranking, but it's sad because even though he beat the best fighter in the world, Werdum is not the best fighter in the world. He's not even the best heavyweight. You know why? Because he got knocked out by Junior Dos Santos, who's one of the top 5 UFC fighters. So, it's crazy. I was not shocked to see this loss. Werdum is a legit jiu-jitsu guy, and I'm actually thrilled to see a jiu-jitsu guy dethrone Fedor rather than some bum like Rogers get a lucky punch on Fedor and knock him out and get a victory he doesn't deserve. At least the way Fedor lost to Werdum, it was through studied technique. That's a high-level move right there. Combination armbar triangle. The way he set it up was beautiful. Fedor was flailing away, but he knew he fell into the triangle. He tried the escape. He was actually doing the escape, but he faltered. I'm guessing because the armbar he readjusted. When he did, Werdum readjusted, sunk it in tighter. That was all she wrote. I'm running out of time here. YouTube always has a bad habit of cutting off the last minute of my videos, so I'm going to try to wrap it up and just say Fedor was not overrated. He's not a never was. In a rematch with Werdum, I would still probably put my money on Fedor. He would be smarter the second time around. He knows how to avoid all those submissions. He got caught. It happens to everybody. But he deserves mad respect. I'm just saddened now because we may never see him in the UFC. He may never fight the best heavyweights in the world. And that's sad. It's a shame. And it really represents the end of an era. Pride died years ago. Fedor was really the last holdover from that era. Now with his defeat, the mystique is gone, and it's kind of sad. But things will carry on. They'll carry on. And we have some great fights coming up. Brock Lesnar versus Shane Carwin. So, Fedor, respect. Hold your head up high. Werdum, only jiu-jitsu fighter to submit both